reviewed all his trial testimony to make sure everything kind of fell in line and sync. The Gottis would quibble with some of that, but by and large, I mean, I believed the story and I presented it. I think, Eli was a really good athlete. He was recruited to play baseball at the University of Tampa, and then I think he got Tommy John. His elbow popped, and he couldn't play anymore, and so he came back to New York. And I think what happened with John A. Light was the energy and the drive that made him a good athlete. He took that and used it in the other role. And he had that same energy, that same drive, the same desire to succeed. Now it's a distorted kind of work ethic, but I think that's what happened. And he became a major player in the Gambino organization. The Gambinos don't go, no, he just was a hanger-on guy. Well, John Gotti Jr. was the best man at A. Light's wedding. And A. Light was a groomsman at Vicky Gotti's wedding. So if he's just a hang-around guy, how's that happen? You know?
Yeah.
The other thing that bothers John Gotti Jr. extensively is he sat down with the FBI and tried to cut a deal. And the New York papers had written about this when it happened. And I basically, in the book, present the FBI memo of that meeting. And Junior now is trying to spin it that, well, I sat down with them, but I was never really going to cooperate, and I just wanted to know what they knew, and blah, 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 blah. If you read that memo, which is, I think, 5 pages long, he threw a lot of people under the bus. And now he's trying to say, oh, no, I wasn't really going to cooperate. I don't know why that deal didn't work out. Maybe he did back away, or maybe the FBI decided we can't make a deal with John Gotti Jr. because of who he is. I don't know the answer to that, but I do know he did sit down and he made the offer. And here's the irony about it. Subsequent to that, the last couple of years, he's been talking about doing a documentary called WITSEC Mafia, Witness Security Program Mafia. All the guys that went into WITSEC, A. Light being one of them, and Sammy Gravano. There's a host of guys. And the irony to me is, if Gotti Jr.'s proffer session had been accepted, he could have been the boss of the WITSEC Mafia. He doesn't want to hear that, but that's the reality. And all the other spin that he puts out there, you got to keep coming back to that. He sat down with the FBI. He was trying to cut a deal. He's calling A. Light a rat. A. Light makes no bones about what he was and what he did. He said, look, I did all these things. I beat people up. I murdered people. I was a rotten individual. And I also testified. I was a rat. But he said, they were ready to throw me under the bus, and that was my only alternative. He spent 2 years in a prison in Brazil, one of the most horrific prisons in the world.
Yeah, Franco.
Yeah, so I mean that's part of the book as well. He's a fascinating guy. I mean, and he continues to market himself. There's a whole thing going on, as you guys well know. These guys, Gravano, Michael Franzese, Bobby Luisi up in Boston, John A. Light, they found that they don't need somebody like me anymore. They don't need a middleman. They can just get this social media provides them with a platform. They can get out there and start telling their story whenever, however, and to whomever they want. And that's what's going on. And it's changed the whole dynamic, I think.
What do you think of the Gotti family in terms of how they stack up against other criminal enterprises and families?
I mean, I think the bottom line in New York, if you want to look contemporaneously, look at the Genovese family and look at the Gambino family. Look at Vincent Gigotti and look at John Gotti Sr. Who knew how to run an organization? It's a difference between, I think, being a boss and being a leader. There's a difference, and I think John Gotti Sr. liked to be the boss. I don't know that he knew how to be a leader, and as a result, I think he drove his organization into the ground.
As you mentioned, A-Light and Gotti Jr. makes note of this. A-Light wasn't used in a lot of prosecutions. We hear about the main criticism against A-Light is his believability. The juries didn't believe his version of events. It seems that the Gottis and other families have leaned on the fact repeatedly over and over to try to discredit him, and by extension, discredit the Gotti's rules book. Why do you think the jury may have disbelieved him, and what forces were at work, if any, during the trial?
Oh yeah, I mean, you got to remember, Gotti Jr. was on trial 3 times before that trial.
Yeah,
courtesy assault case. So, and those ended well. I think A. Light was a dangerous individual, and he presented himself with a jury as a dangerous individual. And I guess it comes down to is a juror going to convict somebody based on that kind of testimony? Now, he testified at another trial against another mobster and ended up with a conviction. In the Gotti Jr. trial, depending on whose statistics you get, the jury was split 7-5 and 8-4, I think, on different counts to convict. So he convinced some of the jurors, but not all of the jurors. And it's a hung jury is not an acquittal. A hung jury is we couldn't decide. And the prosecution, after trying Gotti Jr. 3 times in the Curtis Newman case, and 4th time with Gotti, decided we're not going to do it again. Here's the other interesting thing, and it's funny how the legal system works. That indictment was originally brought in Tampa, Florida. And Gotti's lawyers rightly argued most of the events revolve around New York. The trial should be in New York. That's the thing. I believe if that trial had occurred in Tampa, it might have had a different outcome. Different jury, different people have a different concept. We're talking about a New York, basically, New York metropolitan jury. The Gotti name carries a lot of weight. So there's a lot of different factors coming into play. We could argue forever about John A. Light stands behind what he said. Federal prosecutors and FBI agents who investigated it said he was the real deal. Now, he didn't get a conviction in that case. It happens. Stuff happens.
Yeah, I mean, he came across, I thought he was credible. Like you said, he comes across as noble in that world, a genuine tough guy and whatnot. But again, the Gottis have their people. A lot of people say, oh, he's embellishing or inventing these stories. Before we move on, what would you say to those people that say that John A. Light's embellishing or fabricating some of these stories?
One, it's difficult to prove whether he is or he isn't. I accept that. But I'm looking at a guy who basically put his life on the line out on the streets, and then again put his life on his line when he decided to cooperate. And he was vetted by federal prosecutors and vetted by FBI agents, who certainly were in that world and knew of that world. And it's no small thing to take the guy and put him up in a witness stand and say, I believe in what he's saying.
Sure. I think the recording actually stopped, Bob, when you left. And at that point, I was telling George something really important about how the podcast began and how it began with the press conference that I did with John Elite, where you came and involved Phil Baroni, the New York badass Phil Baroni, and his father, who had been a Gold Star detective for NYPD, was involved with the Gambino family, who was Johnny A. Light's partner in bookmaking as well as loan sharking. He used his badge to rob drug dealers. And folks who are fans, who are fight fans, a lot of fight fans who watch our show, obviously, that still don't know the extent to which the New York badass Phil Baroni was involved with the Gambino family when he was a troubled young man. His mother was in Massapequa. His father was much grittier in Queens. He left Massapequa, came to Queens, had a falling out with his father, lived with A-Light. He got involved in scores and robberies. Eventually, he got stabbed in the back of the head, moved to Michigan, met Dan Severn, Selfish Severn, and started his fight career from there. So a lot of folks don't know that backstory. That's how we started this show. But I want to segue